I think it's very important for the United States and for the Trump administration to hear that there is a bipartisan position in relation to the Prime Minister's call to remove this tariff from a very close and dear ally of the United States. I want there to be a very clear message to the Trump administration that we don't believe that this tariff should be put in place, and if it remains in place, then I believe it will damage the relationship between the United States and Australia. We have an incredible relationship with the United States, long-standing. We've fought for over 100 years side by side with the United States. They're obviously part of the Five Eyes Compact. There is clearly a very important people-to-people link that has spanned generations through the different arrangements that we've had in the trade space, in science, in many areas of mutual endeavour. We've done a lot of work with the United States, clearly to try and provide support and stability, whether that's in Iraq or whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in our near region. This is an incredibly important relationship, and I want to make sure that we have the strongest possible relationship, and tariffs are not warranted against Australia, particularly because we have a trade surplus with the United States. So I want to make that very clear. I just also make mention of the fact that I spoke with Peter Malinauskas this morning from South Australia in relation to the situation around Whyalla, which obviously is a difficult and precarious issue. And I said to the Premier that as a coalition we'd be very keen to work closely with the South Australian government to do whatever we can to make sure that we can preserve jobs and that industry in South Australia. And I'd spoken this morning also with my colleagues Rowan Ramsey and James Stevens and Tony Passon in relation to that same issue. It's an incredibly worrying situation in Whyalla, and as a result of the Albanese government's energy policy, they're making it harder and harder for these businesses to survive and operate. So that was an important discussion this morning as well. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr Dutton, do you welcome Donald Trump confirming that Australia is being considered for exemptions? Do you think this is a success for Anthony Albanese, and would have you handled the situation any differently?
Well, look, I think it's a statement of fact that the Prime Minister has made the relationship more difficult through his previous comments, the comments of Penny Wong and comments obviously of Ambassador Rudd, which were deeply personal in nature, and the President will have noticed those comments. So I think it's very difficult when that's the starting point in the relationship. But what's important now is that the Trump administration hears that there is a bipartisan position in Australia to stand up for our national interest, and that national interest is best served by a removal of the tariff as it applies to Australia. And if it stays in place, then I think it damages the relationship, and I've been very clear about that. Yes,
If the tariffs do go ahead, do you consider that purely the fault of Donald Trump, or do you blame squarely at Anthony Albanese for it?
Well, it's a decision of the Trump administration, and I don't think it's warranted. And I strongly support the Prime Minister in his call for the tariff to be reduced. We are a surplus trading nation with the United States. I think there's an incredible opportunity for us to do a lot more work and with the United States in the trade space. I think there's an enormous opportunity for us in AUKUS, both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, which was negotiated by the coalition government. I think there's enormous opportunity for us in the civil nuclear industry as we grow that here in Australia. That is a huge trading opportunity with the United States, and I'm sure the Trump administration would embrace those opportunities. And that's a big part of the reason as to why we don't want tariffs put in place against Australia.
I wonder if you could just reflect on the fact that these tariffs are aimed at everybody. We might get an exemption here, but these are essentially on the entire global trading system. That also hurts our exporters to countries like China. I'm thinking companies like Fortescue and Gina Reinhardt's business would be very much in the firing line.
Well, I don't support the imposition of tariffs in any circumstance unless there is a national security imperative. I've been a part of the coalition government since John Howard's days, and I believe very strongly in free markets. And I think from the Trump administration's perspective, you can understand, given some of the trade deficits and some of the inequalities in in their interpretation of those relationships, and ultimately it's an issue for them. But do I believe in the application of tariffs? No, I don't. I want to see a free and vibrant trading market. We negotiated a record number of free trade agreements when we were in government, including with China, for example, and I want to make sure that those markets can grow, because ultimately we're a nation that produces more than we can consume, and we want to make sure that those markets are open to us and that we have a free trade environment, because it helps lift people out of poverty, it increases the GDP of nations that are emerging, and it helps strengthen nations like ours that are already productive. But we can, I think, do a lot more with the United States, and we can have our best shot at doing a lot more with the United States if we don't have a tariff in place.
Mr. Dutton, do you think, Mr. Trump is a deal maker, do you think that Australia will have to give anything in exchange for getting a dispensation here? And did your manager of opposition business go too far during question time yesterday?
Well, I'll deal with the last part first. The claim yesterday by somebody who's been largely absent from the public debate on anti-Semitism over the last 15 months, that somehow the coalition's politicising the issue of anti-Semitism is a disgraceful slur, and the Speaker, before he was monstered by the Prime Minister and by Tony Burke, asked for that to be withdrawn, and it should have been withdrawn because it was outrageous and it's completely without foundation. So I think that's the important point, and as a result of that, it required a response which was entirely appropriate and proportionate. So I'm not going to stand being accused of that. We've supported the Jewish community. I've said to you before, I would have the same stance in relation to any other element of society that was being targeted in the way that the Jewish community is. I don't tolerate racism or that intolerance on any basis, not on religion, not on somebody's background, not on their heritage, on no basis whatsoever.
What do you think the Prime Minister and his government's next move should be in the negotiations?
Well, there should be a continued dialogue, and we should be doing everything we can through the relationships that we have into the administration to try and see a reversal in the executive order. We should be talking to those with expertise in the relationship and those who understand the Trump administration well. And I think the Prime Minister deserves support in whatever measure is reasonably taken to see a reversal in the tariff, and we would support those measures.
Is Kevin Dutton the right man for the job?
Mr. Dutton, in terms of the $800 million down payment that was taken to the US over the weekend on AUKUS, what does it say about Donald Trump if, given the relationship with Australia, he still keeps this executive order in place? He doesn't give Australia an exemption.
Well, I've made the point, my job is to stand up for our national interest, and it is in our national interest for that tariff to be removed. I want the trading relationship between Australia and the United States to expand, and I believe under a coalition government it can expand. I think there is enormous opportunity for us to work closely with the United States under Pillar 1 and 2 of AUKUS. The defence relationship otherwise is important, but also in science, in AI, in autonomous vehicles. There is an amazing opportunity for us to work with the United States to adopt the latest technology of zero emissions nuclear power generation for our domestic industry. And heaven knows we need it, because the lights are going out in this country. The prices are going up further under a Labor government, and I want to make sure we can do everything we can to help families here, and we help families by increasing our trading relationship and having productive and profitable companies. If we do that, then we can. I think there's huge opportunity for employment and economic growth. But when you apply the wet blanket of a tariff, it is detrimental to the relationship, and that's why I don't believe it can stand.
Do you know if Scott Morrison or Joe Hockey or any other Australians are activated on this issue?
No, I don't. No, I don't know the answer to it.
Mr. Dutton, just similar to what Greg was trying to ask there, is Kevin Rudd still the best person to be the ambassador to Australia, to the US, or might, given the way that Trump is so determined to do things his way in this term, and those moderating voices around him are no longer there, that we may need to have a an ambassador who's more simpatico with his worldview?
Well, I think the important message at the moment is that we support the work of Ambassador Rudd, and I assume that he's getting access to the White House and to key administration figures. And I presume that that he has a functioning relationship with the Chief of Staff, as Joe Hockey did, as Kim Beazley did, and others. I assume that those relationships are all developed. I don't know is the real answer, Andrew, as to whether that's the case or not, and the Prime Minister can answer that. But I want to make sure that the ambassador is given every assistance to work with the administration to make the case, to argue the point that the tariff should be reduced, should be removed, and I'm sure that's the work that he's undertaking at the moment. Yes, mate.
Mr Dutton, is the political power of the union movement a sticking point in negotiations over the electoral funding bill with Labor? Are you optimistic that a deal will be reached this week?
Well, we've been conducting good faith negotiations with the government, and that continues on. And if at some stage there's an arrangement that's arrived at, we'll make some comment. But at the moment, we're still in those discussions.
Question
yeah.
though, did Michael Sukkot make a mistake in seeking to shut down
Absolutely not.
yesterday, rather than just simply asking him to withdraw?
Absolutely not.
The optics of asking the nation's most senior Jewish politician to stop speaking in a rare move in the House Representative during question time. Surely that is a questionable tactic when he's talking about it.
It's absolutely not. He was closed down because he made a suggestion that we were politicising anti-Semitism. He was completely out of order, and if he had the decency that you would expect from the first law officer, he would have withdrawn that without us requesting him to do so. It was a slur, it was misplaced. He, I think, apologised to the Prime Minister on the front bench afterwards, and so he should, because, as I say, Mark Dreyfus has largely been missing from this debate for 15 months. And I think if you speak to people within the Jewish community, there are a lot of people who wouldn't be that complimentary of the contribution or lack thereof that's been made by the Attorney-General, given the rise and the flourish of anti-Semitic conduct that we've seen. So it was appropriate, and it was the right response for somebody, regardless of who they are, that seeks to say that we're politicising what I think is an incredibly important issue, and we made that point. Phil.
Separate issue, the vehicle emissions standards. We've seen data from the industry that are showing that the manufacturers are finding the trajectory too steep, and they can't offset the emissions quickly enough, and there's a price pressure coming on. Do you support their calls to just at least review those and slow the trajectory down a bit until the EV uptake increases?
Well, Phil, all of these warnings were out there for Chris Bowen at the start. This was a policy designed to please inner-city Green voters. That's what it's about. And frankly, that's what the Albanese government's been about, which is why the Albanese government has done so much damage to families living in the suburbs. And now the Albanese government is talking about a car and ute tax that is going to go up, and it's going to make it harder for families in a cost of living crisis to find the money to buy a vehicle. Long before young people talk about buying a house, they talk about a vehicle purchase, young tradies and others who want an affordable vehicle. The government's zealot-like approach on the energy question extends to them hating and now taxing hybrids, that hybrid vehicles are unacceptable, even though their emissions are much lower than other vehicles. So I don't think it's sustainable, and Australians go to the next election knowing that if they vote for Anthony Albanese, they're voting for an increase in the car price that they'll pay when they go to buy a Ford Ranger or a Toyota Hilux or a whatever it might be, Mitsubishi Triton or whatever vehicle it is. Under Anthony Albanese, they'll be paying more for their vehicles than what they will under a coalition government. We've stated our position in relation to it already, and I believe it's the wrong policy for our country. And I don't think families can take yet another slug from the Albanese government. This government has created an energy crisis, a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis, a health crisis, and we now find that they've discovered another opportunity to slug families with another hit on their family budgets. That is a tax on motor vehicles, and I just don't think families can afford 3 more years of Anthony Albanese.
You've presented a big bipartisan front here, which has the tariff you've spoken about, how bad tariffs are. You've talked about giving the ambassador as much support as he needs, but often yourself and your ministers bring up previous remarks made by Anthony Albanese and his ministers when talking about his relationship. How is that in the national interest to remind about the division of the past?
Well, I think it's just a statement of fact. You can't just brush over the history of the judgments that the Prime Minister's made. The Prime Minister's made some shocking judgments as Prime Minister, but also as opposition leader and before that as a minister. And there are consequences for that. Now, I can't apologise for comments that the Prime Minister's previously made that now damage the relationship. That's an issue for the Prime Minister to address. And that's really a question you can ask of him. Well, I think he's talking about being scared of President Trump. I don't know whether he's still scared of him or happy to be sort of on the end of the phone but not in person or something. I don't know. But what I do know is that President Trump hears those messages. And I don't think it's productive to the dynamic in the relationship.
When will we see actual detailed costings of your cost of living relief measures and energy bill relief measures for voters? And are you concerned that an interest rate cut next week will give Labour a boost in polls?
Well, on interest rate cuts, I hope for the sake of families and small businesses that there is an interest rate cut, but that's a decision for the Reserve Bank Governor, and she shouldn't feel pressured one way or the other, because you can cut rates and then find that they've been cut too early, and then the Reserve Bank will have to increase rates later on. That's obviously a real concern to economists and to families as well. Now, there have been 27,000 small businesses who have closed over the last couple of years under this government, and there are many businesses who are feeling the pinch because not only has your mortgage interest rate gone up, but people's overdraft and credit facility rates have gone up, in some cases, to double digits. And at the same time, every input cost has gone up, including energy, which, talking to some businesses, it's gone up by 100%. And that's why businesses can't cope under this government. Now, we'll release our costings and our arrangements, as would be the case, and as was the case with the Labor Party and the Liberal Party at the last election and the one before that. So we'll do it at the appropriate time. I mean, I thought I heard the Treasurer say yesterday that our small business policy was now going to cost $10 billion a year. I mean, is that for real? I don't know whether I misheard him or not. Why not say $1 trillion or $2 trillion? I mean, it's comical. And it shows that this Treasurer can't be taken seriously. The cost of our policy in relation to that issue is sub $250 million over a 2-year period. And the desperation of the Treasurer now, I think, is obvious for a lot of Australians to see. Okay, where haven't we been? Yes, mate.
Just to follow on from Phil's question,
yeah.
On climate policy, what should we expect from the coalition now? Would you unwind the safeguard mechanism in particular?
Well, we've been clear in relation to our commitment to net zero by 2050. I think it's concerning for Australians to know that the government has policy at the moment and has modelling which shows that energy costs will go up as a result of the 2035 targets, but they won't release that before the election. Now, the reason this is important is because they would normally release that detail and make that announcement in February, but of course they're not going to do that. So our policy is that we want renewables in the system, and we support renewables. As you saw when we were in government, we put a lot of money into projects and created an environment where significant projects are now a reality. But we can't pretend for any longer that the batteries are going to see us through the hours of darkness or over a week of rain. Look at Townsville at the moment. Is anybody seriously suggesting that the lights would be on there without diesel generators in the Chris Bowen new world? It's just not possible. We need to have baseload power. Green hydrogen is not prospective. Investors and governments are backing out of it at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And the government's been held, or been caught holding the baby on this issue. And they are doing a lot of damage to the economy. I don't think you should underestimate how much damage is being done to our economy now because of the renewables-only energy policy. So we'll have a sensible policy which helps us decarbonise, which makes sure that we can keep the lights on, or businesses won't survive. Hospitals can't run on intermittent power. They need 24/7 power. And in relation to cost, at some stage, this government needs to focus on end-user cost, because people can't continue to pay another 34% increase in their electricity bills, which is what's happened under this government. Otherwise, we're going to see more job losses and more dampening of economic activity. So,
Around 20 coalition senators yesterday, Mr Dutton, voted for a Pauline Hanson motion relating to, I believe, transgender children and the medical system in that regard. Was that vote with your sanction, and could I
Yes,
get your response to
we've
that?
taken a position before that it's a conscience vote in relation to that issue, and that's applied as it did in previous votes. So there's no difference in that. Yes, yeah.
Comments you're making about the Reserve Bank, you seem to be implying that the Reserve Bank might be at risk of cutting prematurely before inflation's under control, and therefore would have to go back up again. Have I heard that?
No,
right?
I think my point, firstly, is that I think Australians deserve rate relief because they've had 12 increases of interest rates under the Albanese government. And if interest rates come down, then that's a good thing, obviously, for particularly mortgage holders. That's the first point that I made. The second point is that the Reserve Bank Governor, I think, has shown her independence, and she's not going to be pushed one way or the other by the government or the opposition or commentators or anyone else. She will do what is in our country's best interest, and she'll do that based on looking at the economic settings and what is happening in the economy that is relevant to her consideration. And that is not going to be swayed, as I point out. Third point is, as we know, that in a circumstance where interest rates come down prematurely, you don't want that scenario because you then see upward pressure within a couple of months or a few months' time. Now, the Reserve Bank Governor will weigh all of that up and make the decision based on her professional judgment, and I think she deserves the respect of all of us because I think she's put what is our country's best interests first and foremost in her considerations and decisions in the past, and that's something we should support. Thank you very much. Thank you.